What if the one person treating you like you were invisible was the only one who was ever supposed to see you? For Amelia Vance, a 23-year-old with an encyclopedic knowledge of 18th century porcelain and the weary hands of a waitress, a new patron at the city's most exclusive restaurant was more than just a challenge. He was a demolition. Julian Thorne, the cold, calculating magnate of private equity, a man whose fortune was dwarfed only by the chilling emptiness in his eyes. Every clipped command, every dismissive glance felt like a judgment on her very existence. But Amelia had no way of knowing that the man who saw her as nothing more than a fixture in the room was bound to her by a secret forged in fear and buried by lies. A secret connected to a small, intricate music box on her nightstand, and a past her ailing mother refused to confront. This isn't just the story of a waitress and a billionaire. It's the story of a sister and a brother, torn apart by a monster and reunited by a truth that would either save them or destroy them completely. The air in Étoile was a carefully orchestrated performance. It smelled of money, a subtle blend of truffle oil, vintage leather from the banquettes, and the expensive perfume of its clientele. For Amelia Vance, the scent was a constant reminder of the chasm between her life and the one she served. By day, she navigated this world of quiet opulence, her mind, trained to spot the subtle maker's mark on a Sèvres vase, now focused on the precise angle at which to pour a 1982 Margaux. By night, in the cramped two-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother Eleanor, she would lose herself in textbooks, tracing the lineage of European silver or the intricate joinery of Georgian furniture. She was an apprentice to a kindly old antique dealer, Mr. Alastair. But that paid in knowledge, not in the cold, hard cash needed for Eleanor's mounting medical bills. Her mother's heart was failing, a slow, tired surrender that mirrored the quiet resignation in her eyes whenever the past was mentioned. So Amelia wore the crisp white apron of Étoile, her passion for history shelved alongside the polished wine glasses, each tip a small victory against the tide of debt. On a Thursday evening that hummed with the city's elite, the demolition arrived. He didn't enter the restaurant, he conquered it. Julian Thorne moved with a predatory stillness, his presence sucking the warmth from the room. He was dressed in a dark, tailored suit that seemed woven from shadow and steel, his features sharp and unforgiving. There was a scar, thin and white, that cut through his left eyebrow, the only mar on a face that was otherwise icily perfect. He was seated in Amelia's section. It felt less like chance and more like a sentence. "I require the corner booth." "Now," he said to the maire d', his voice a low vibration of command, not a request. "Sir, the DuPont party has that reservation, but I can offer—" "The DuPont party can be moved," Thorne stated, his gaze already dismissing the man. He walked to the booth as if he already owned it. The DuPonts, a wealthy older couple, momentarily forgotten in the wake of his sheer audacity. The maitre d' scrambled, apologizing profusely, reseating the flustered couple with the haste of a man trying to avert an international incident. Amelia approached, her professional smile a fragile piece of armor. "Good evening, sir. My name is Amelia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." He didn't look at her. His attention was on his phone, his thumb swiping through data with a relentless rhythm. "A bottle of the Montrachet, and bring the ice bucket to precisely 48 degrees. Use a digital thermometer. I will be checking." "Of course, sir. And for your dinner selection?" He finally lifted his eyes. They were a startling pale gray, like a winter sky, and utterly devoid of warmth. They swept over her, from her neatly pinned hair to her sensible black shoes, and she felt herself being catalogued, assessed, and dismissed in the space of a heartbeat. "Do I look like a woman to you?" he asked, the question laced with a quiet, chilling venom. Amelia blinked, confused. "Sir?" "Your menu," he said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the leather-bound book she had placed on the table. "It's the ladies' menu. It doesn't have the market prices for the steaks listed. Is this incompetence or a deliberate attempt to insult my intelligence?" Amelia's cheeks flushed hot. It was a simple mistake. In her haste, she'd grabbed the wrong menu. "My sincerest apologies, sir. I'll replace it immediately." She retreated, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the kitchen, she leaned against a stainless steel counter, taking a shaky breath. Table 4 got Thorn, she whispered to another waiter, a veteran named Leo. Leo grimaced. Julian Thorn? Oh, you poor kid. Last week he sent back his lobster bisque because he claimed the swirl of cream was aesthetically displeasing. He's not a customer, he's a stress test. Amelia returned with the correct menu and the wine, her hands steady despite the tremor inside her. She presented the bottle, opened it with practiced efficiency, and poured a small amount for him to taste. He swirled it, sniffed it, and took a sip, his eyes closed in concentration for a theatrically long moment. Passable, he conceded, as if granting a royal pardon. For the rest of the meal, he was a master of psychological warfare. He'd ask her a question about the provenance of the scallops, and just as she began to answer, he'd turn away to take a call, leaving her speaking to his turned shoulder. He complained that the ambient light was casting a shadow over his plate. He requested a specific brand of Swiss sparkling water, which he then left untouched. It was all done with a quiet, surgical precision, designed to make her feel small, inept, and utterly insignificant. The final insult came with the check. The bill was over $600. He placed his black, featureless credit card on the tray. When she returned with the slip, he signed it with a sharp, angry scrawl. He rose from the table, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. The service, he said, his cold gray eyes meeting hers for the first time since the menu incident, was precisely what one would expect from a place that hires the unremarkable to serve the unforgettable. He strode out, leaving a wake of chilled air behind him. Amelia walked to the table, bracing herself. On the tip line, there was a bold, decisive 0, and scrawled beneath it, in the same sharp handwriting, were 3 words: do better work. Amelia stared at the note, a wave of humiliation so intense it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the money. It was a dismissal of her entire being. She crumpled the receipt, the paper a tight, angry ball in her fist. She didn't know it then, but this was not a random act of cruelty. It was the beginning of an obsession. For reasons he couldn't articulate even to himself, Julian Thorn was about to make her life his personal project. He returned the following Thursday, and the one after that. He always requested her section, a fact that sent a sliver of ice through Amelia's veins each time the maitre d' informed her. Each visit was a new and inventive form of torment. He would quiz her on the restaurant's history, on the chef's culinary training, on the exact blend of coffee beans used in the espresso, all with the bored air of a grand inquisitor. One evening, he noticed a faint ink smudge on her finger, a remnant from a long night of studying. A scholar? He mused, a cruel smile touching his lips. Tell me, what does one study that leads to a career in carrying plates? The history of disappointment? His words found their mark, striking at the very heart of her insecurities. The fear that this restaurant, this apron, was not a temporary stop, but her final destination. She would go home, the sting of his words clinging to her, and look at her sleeping mother, the soft rattle in Eleanor's breath, a constant, desperate metronome. The need for this job, for every humiliating dollar, kept her chained to his table. The breaking point arrived on a cold Tuesday in November, nearly 2 months into his campaign. Étoile was hosting a private event in its main dining room, so regular patrons were seated in the more intimate solarium. Julian was there, entertaining a stern-looking Japanese businessman. An enormous deal was clearly in the works. The tension at the table was palpable. Amelia was serving their main course when she overheard a fragment of their conversation. And the centerpiece of my collection, Julian was saying, gesturing to a picture on his tablet. A genuine Orloff salt cellar. Fabergé, of course. 1899. The Japanese man nodded, impressed. A magnificent piece. The craftsmanship is undeniable. Amelia glanced at the screen as she set down a plate. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't an Orlov. The scrollwork was too heavy, the enamel a shade too vibrant. It was a beautiful piece, yes, but it was a forgery, a very, very good one, likely from the workshop of a notorious Fabergé imitator named Mikhail Perkin, who had a telltale flaw in his gilded filigree, a flaw she had spent weeks studying with Mr. Allister. Her training, her entire being, screamed at the error. It was like a world-class mathematician hearing someone declare that 2 + 2 = 5. To let it stand felt like a betrayal of everything she loved and respected. Her professional duty told her to stay silent, to walk away. But Julian's endless condescension, his dismissal of her as an unthinking automaton, rose up in her throat. He wanted her to do better work. Fine. She would. She paused, her hand still on the man's plate. "My apologies for interrupting, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the hushed atmosphere of the solarium. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with irritation at the interruption. "What is it?" "It's a beautiful piece," Amelia said, nodding toward the tablet. "Truly exquisite. But it's not from Fabergé's main workshop. The filigree work on the base, the slight imperfection in the Rococo scroll, that's the signature of Mikhail Perkin, one of his workmasters who also took private commissions. It's still incredibly valuable, of course, but it's not an imperial adjacent piece. A connoisseur would spot the difference immediately." Silence. A thick, suffocating silence descended on the table. The Japanese businessman's polite smile faltered. He looked from the tablet to Amelia, a new, sharp interest in his eyes. Julian Thorne's face, which had been a mask of cool control, was slowly contorting into something terrifying. The color drained from his cheeks, replaced by a dark, dangerous flush of rage. He had been exposed, undermined, and not by a business rival, but by a waitress. "Get out," he whispered, his voice so low and lethal it was more frightening than a shout. "Sir, I only meant to—" "I said, get out!" he roared, slamming his hand on the table. The wine glasses jumped, a splash of red wine spilling like blood on the pristine white tablecloth. Every head in the solarium turned. "You are fired, you insolent, pathetic nobody. How dare you? You think you can humiliate me in front of my guest?" He stood up, his towering frame shaking with fury. He looked at her not with contempt, but with a pure, unadulterated hatred that stunned her. It was too personal, too profound. It was the rage of a man whose deepest wound had just been salted. "Get your things and crawl back to whatever miserable hole you came from," he snarled. "You are finished." Amelia stood frozen for a second, the entire restaurant staring at her. Then her survival instinct kicked in. She turned, her face burning with a shame so profound it felt like it would consume her, and she walked away. She didn't look back, but she could feel his hateful glare on her, a physical force pushing her out of the room, out of the job, and into the terrifying uncertainty of the cold November night. She had lost everything. But in that moment of utter destruction, she had unknowingly lit a fuse. Julian Thorne's world was about to explode, and she was standing at the epicenter. The humiliation of that night clung to Amelia like a shroud. She was jobless, her name undoubtedly blacklisted from every fine dining establishment in the city. The manager of Étoile, a man who had always been kind to her, had been profusely apologetic but firm. Julian Thorne was not a man one crossed. The rent was due, and Eleanor's prescription for her beta blockers needed refilling. Panic, cold and sharp, was a constant companion. She spent her days at Mr. Allister's dusty antique shop, a sanctuary of quiet and history that felt a universe away from the cold gloss of Étoile. He listened to her story, his kind, wrinkled face etched with concern. "The man sounds like a brute," he said, polishing a silver lorgnette with a soft cloth. "But you, my dear, were correct. I saw the auction results for that Perkin piece. It was misrepresented. You have a gift, Amelia, a precise and honest eye. Such things are rare and to the right people, priceless." His words were a small balm on her wounded pride, but they didn't pay the bills. Meanwhile, in a glass tower overlooking the city, Julian Thorne was unraveling. The deal with the Japanese tycoon had not fallen through. In fact, the man, Mr. Tanaka, had been deeply impressed. A company whose waitress possesses more expertise than most gallery curators is a company that values substance, Tanaka had remarked. A subtle dig that had infuriated Julian more than any outright failure. He'd secured the deal, but his victory felt hollow, tainted by the memory of Amelia's quiet, confident voice and the look of dawning respect in Tanaka's eyes, a look that had been meant for him. He couldn't shake the incident, the sheer audacity of it. He told himself it was about insubordination, but a deeper, more unsettling question gnawed at him. Who was she? He had his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Gavriel, run a discreet background check. He expected to find a history of petty cons, a grifter with a niche knowledge used to scam the wealthy. The report that landed on his desk 2 days later was not what he expected. It was a story of quiet desperation and academic brilliance. Amelia Vance, 23, top of her class in art history at the State University before dropping out due to financial hardship. Sole caretaker for her ailing mother, Eleanor Vance. Currently an unpaid apprentice to a minor antique dealer. There was no criminal record, no history of fraud. There was only a quiet, grinding poverty and a single glaring anomaly. Julian stared at the name of Amelia's mother. Eleanor Vance. It was a common enough name, but something about it tugged at a thread deep in the labyrinth of his memory. He pulled up a grainy DMV photograph of the woman. She was older, her face etched with worry and illness, but the shape of her eyes, the gentle curve of her mouth, it was familiar, frighteningly so. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and hard data, was suddenly breached by an unwelcome ghost, a half-remembered scent of lavender, the whisper of a lullaby in a language he no longer spoke, the image of a woman with kind eyes laughing in a sunlit garden. These were fragments of a life before his father had systematically erased every trace of his mother, a woman who, according to the official story, had been weak, unstable, and had abandoned him for another man when he was 5 years old. The official story had always been that his mother's name was Helena. His father, Marcus Thorne Sr., a titan of industry with a heart of granite, had ensured it. But Julian knew his father was a liar. He was a master manipulator who had forged Julian in his own ruthless image, teaching him that emotion was a liability and trust was a fool's game. Driven by an unease he couldn't name, Julian bypassed Gavriel and began his own search, using his formidable resources to dig into a past his father had sealed shut. He hacked into sealed court records, accessed old hospital archives, chased a ghost through decades of digital dust. What he found made the glass walls of his office feel like they were closing in. He found a marriage certificate, Marcus Thorne Sr. and Eleanor Vance. He found a birth certificate for himself, Julian Thorne, mother listed as Eleanor, and then he found another one, dated 2 years later. A girl, Amelia Thorne. The document was followed by a death certificate issued for both mother and daughter 6 months later. Cause of death, a single vehicle car accident on a rural road. Case closed. A lie. A monstrous, intricate lie. His mother and sister hadn't abandoned him. His father had declared them dead. He had murdered them on paper, erasing them from existence to maintain his narrative of abandonment and betrayal. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Eleanor, his mother, had fled. She had taken his sister Amelia and had run for her life, away from a man Julian knew was capable of chilling cruelty. The scar above his own eye was a permanent reminder of his father's temper, a childhood punishment for spilling a glass of milk. He looked at the file on Amelia Vance, the waitress he had terrorized, the woman he had gotten fired, the woman with her mother's eyes, his sister, the sister he thought had been dead for 25 years. The realization didn't bring joy or relief. It brought a tidal wave of self-loathing so profound it buckled his knees. His cruelty towards her hadn't been random. It was the subconscious, twisted echo of his father's poison. He had seen what he was taught to see: weakness, insignificance. He had treated the last remnant of his real family with the same brutal disdain his father had shown the world. He had become the man his mother had run from. He had to find her. He had to know. But what could he possibly say? "Hello, I'm the brother who has spent the last 2 months making your life a living hell. By the way, our father is a monster who faked your death." He needed proof. One final, irrefutable piece that would bridge the gap between digital records and living truth. His memory dredged up one more fragment, the most persistent ghost of all, the lullaby. It was a simple, haunting melody. His mother would hum it while holding a small, polished wooden box, a music box. He found Amelia's address in the file, a rundown apartment building in a part of the city he hadn't known existed. He drove himself, his chauffeur-driven Maybach looking like a spaceship on the cracked, potholed street. He took the rickety elevator to the fourth floor, his heart, a machine he barely acknowledged, pounding a wild, unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. He knocked on the door of apartment 4B. It was opened by Amelia. Her face was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. When she saw him, her expression shifted from exhaustion to a hostile, fearful confusion. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her body instinctively blocking the doorway. Julian opened his mouth, but the carefully rehearsed words died in his throat. He was Julian Thorne, the man who could eviscerate a hostile board with a single sentence. But in front of his sister, he was speechless. I need to speak with you," he finally managed, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. "We have nothing to talk about. You got me fired. You ruined my life. Now please, leave before I call the police." She tried to close the door, but he put his hand up, stopping it. "Please," he said, and the word was a plea, raw and desperate. "It's about your mother, Eleanor." Amelia froze, her hand dropping from the door. Fear, sharp and immediate, replaced the anger in her eyes. "Is this a threat? Did you do something?" "No, God, no," he said, shaking his head. "This is difficult. Can I come in? I swear I'm not here to hurt you." Warily, she stepped back, letting him into the small, clean but threadbare living room. It was filled with books and smelled faintly of old paper and chamomile tea. A woman, frail and asleep in a recliner with a blanket over her, was clearly Eleanor. The sight of her, alive and real, sent another shockwave through him. "What do you want?" Amelia asked, her voice low and tense, not wanting to wake her mother. Julian's gaze swept the room, searching. "When you were a child," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "did your mother ever sing to you? A lullaby?" Amelia stared at him, bewildered by the bizarre question. "What does that have to do with anything? Please, just answer the question." She hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Yes, all the time. Why?" "And was there a box? A music box?" he pressed, his voice cracking with the strain. Amelia's eyes narrowed in suspicion, but she walked over to a small bookshelf. From the top shelf, she retrieved a small, unassuming box made of dark, polished rosewood with a simple silver inlay of a star. It was worn with age, the corners smooth from countless hands. This was it, the ghost from his memories. "May I?" he asked, his hand trembling as he reached for it. She watched him, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. He took the box. It felt warm, alive with history. With a deep, shuddering breath, he lifted the lid. A series of delicate, tinkling notes filled the silent apartment. It was the melody, the simple, haunting lullaby that had been buried in his subconscious for a quarter of a century. It was the sound of a life he thought he'd lost forever. The fortress around Julian Thorne's heart didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. He sank to his knees, the music box clutched in his hands, and for the first time since he was a small boy, he wept. Deep, ragged, soul-wrenching sobs of a man who had just found his entire world was a lie, and the truth was more painful and beautiful than he could have ever imagined. Amelia just stared, utterly speechless, at the sight of the cold, cruel billionaire kneeling on her worn carpet, broken by the sound of a child's lullaby. The delicate notes of the lullaby faded, leaving a silence in the small apartment that was heavier and more profound than any sound. Amelia stood frozen, watching the man who had been her tormentor crumble on the floor. His sobs were the sounds of a dam breaking, of decades of suppressed grief and rage pouring out in a raw, unfiltered torrent. Slowly he gained control, wiping his face with the back of his hand, his impeccable suit now seeming like a costume on a broken man. He looked up at her, his pale gray eyes red-rimmed and stripped of all their former arrogance. "My name is Julian Thorne," he said, his voice hoarse. Your name is Amelia Thorne. You are my sister." The words hung in the air, nonsensical and absurd. Amelia stared at him, a flicker of angry disbelief on her face. "That's not funny. Is this some kind of sick game? A new way to torment me?" "It's not a game," he said, getting to his feet, his movements unsteady. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. "This is my birth certificate. This is yours. And this is the fraudulent death certificate for you and our mother, Eleanor, filed by our father 25 years ago." He laid them on the coffee table. Amelia's eyes fell upon the documents, her own name, Amelia Thorne, staring back at her in official, typed letters. She saw the name of her mother, Eleanor Vance Thorne, and the name of the father, Marcus Thorne Sr. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It's not possible. My mother said he died before I was born. A construction accident." "Our father is very much alive," Julian said, his voice flat and cold as ice. "And he is the reason our mother ran. He was violent, unpredictable. When I was 5, you were 3. She took you and she disappeared. He told me you both died in a car crash. He told everyone. He buried 2 empty coffins in the family plot." The horror of it washed over Amelia in sickening waves. The evasiveness of her mother, her refusal to ever speak of the past, the constant fear that seemed to live just behind her eyes, it all began to click into a terrifying new mosaic. Her entire life, her very identity, had been built on a foundation of secrets designed to protect her from a monster she never knew existed. A soft groan came from the recliner. Eleanor was stirring, woken by the charged emotions in the room. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim light. She saw Amelia, her face a mask of shock, and then she saw the man standing beside her. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by the last note of the lullaby dissolved into the thick, cloying silence of the tiny apartment. It left a vacuum, a space where, for a quarter of a century, a family had been, and now in its place was only the wreckage of its memory. Amelia stood as if carved from ice, watching the man who had systematically dismantled her professional life now come apart on her threadbare rug. Julian Thorne, the titan of industry, the predator of the boardroom, was weeping. Not with dignity, but with the shuddering, ugly sobs of a soul that has been hollowed out and suddenly, brutally, refilled. He wrestled himself back from the abyss, his breath catching in ragged hitches. He rose, unsteady, a leviathan trying to find its footing on dry land. The tailored lines of his suit, usually a declaration of power, now seemed like the ill-fitting costume of a man playing a role he no longer understood. He looked at her, and the winter in his eyes had been replaced by a raw, desolate landscape of grief. "My name is Julian Thorne," he began, his voice a gravelly ruin. "And your name, your true name, is Amelia Thorne. You are my sister." The words were an absurdity, a cruel punchline to a joke she didn't understand. A laugh, sharp and brittle with disbelief, escaped her lips. "Is this part of the game? Is this what you do when firing someone isn't enough? You come to their home and try to drive them mad?" "There is no game." He moved with a new, hesitant grace, retrieving the documents from his jacket and laying them on the scarred coffee table between them. "This is my birth certificate. Mother, Eleanor Vance Thorne. Father, Marcus Thorne. Sr. And this is yours, Amelia Thorne. And this," his voice dropped, heavy with the weight of the lie, "is the death certificate our father filed for you and our mother 25 years ago." She didn't want to look. Looking would make it real. But her eyes were traitors, drawn to the official typeface, to the names that felt both intimately familiar and utterly alien. Amelia Thorne. The ghost of a name, a life she never lived. She saw her mother's name linked to a man she'd never heard of, a monster. "My father died," she whispered, the words a shield she had carried her entire life. "A construction accident, before I was born." "He is alive," Julian stated, the words like chips of granite. "He is the reason she ran. He is the reason for the scar above my eye. He told me you died. He buried you. He buried both of you in empty coffins and made me watch." The image was so grotesque, so horrifying, that Amelia felt the floor tilt beneath her. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been the soundtrack to her mother's life, her skittishness around strangers, her visceral refusal to discuss the past. It wasn't the quiet grief of a widow, it was the hyper-vigilance of a fugitive. From the recliner, a sound, a soft, terrified whimper. Eleanor's eyes were open, wide with a terror that seemed to transcend time itself. They were not focused on the documents, but on Julian's face. In the sharp angles of his jaw, in the intense set of his eyes, she did not see the boy she had left behind. She saw the man she had fled. "No," she breathed, her voice thin as a whisper of smoke. Her hand, gnarled with age and worry, flew to her chest as if to physically hold her failing heart together. "Marcus, he found us. He sent you." The word burst from Julian's lips, unbidden, a sound of pure anguish. "Mother." He took a half-step forward, his hand outstretched, an offering and a plea. Eleanor recoiled as if he were fire, pressing herself deeper into the worn cushions of the chair. "Stay away from her," she cried, her voice cracking with a fierce, desperate strength. "You took my son. You will not have my daughter." Her mind, clouded by fear and the fog of memory, had collapsed the years. She was back in that house, facing the monster. "Eleanor, no. It's me," Julian said, his voice gentle, trying to coax a frightened animal from its hiding place. "It's Julian. You're Julian. I'm not him. I swear to you, I am not him." He held his hands up, open and empty, a gesture of absolute surrender. Amelia watched, her own shock momentarily eclipsed by the tragic tableau before her. She saw her mother's terror, Julian's desperation, and in the space between them, the 25-year chasm of their stolen lives. Slowly through the haze of her fear, Eleanor truly saw him. She saw the scar, the one she had bandaged, weeping, after Marcus had punished him for a spilled glass of milk. She saw the sorrow that swam in his eyes, a sorrow that had never existed in the cold, hard void of his father's gaze. Her eyes darted from his face to Amelia's, then to the damning papers on the table, and the truth, a truth she had suppressed until it had become a part of her own biology, finally erupted. A sob tore from her throat, a sound of such profound accumulated pain that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. "Oh, my baby," she wept, her eyes locked on Julian. "My little boy, I'm so sorry. I had to leave you. I had to." The story poured out of her then, not in a neat narrative, but in a torrent of fragmented memories and agonizing justifications. She spoke of a life suffocated by quiet terror, of Marcus's chilling moods, of the way the entire mansion would hold its breath when he was home. The escape had been her only secret, a tiny seed of hope she'd nurtured in darkness for more than a year. She'd planned to take them both. She had crept into Julian's room that night, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. But he'd woken up, his sleepy confusion turning to fear at the sight of her urgency. He'd begun to cry, a child's simple cry for comfort, and the sound had been like a death knell. The staff, Marcus's loyal sentinels, would hear. He would be on a plane from Tokyo before her car even reached the state line. "I knew he would hunt us," she choked out, her face buried in her hands. "He would have found us. He would have taken you both back, and I don't know what he would have done. I had seconds to choose, save one or lose both. So I kissed you goodbye. I kissed my sleeping son, and I ran with her." She reached a trembling hand towards Amelia. "It was the only choice I had, and it was the choice that killed me every day since." Amelia wrapped her arms around her mother, holding the frail, shaking body, feeling the tremors of a quarter-century of guilt. She was not holding her sick, quiet mother. She was holding a warrior, a woman who had clawed her way out of hell, making an impossible, Solomonic choice to save what she could. The weight of her mother's secret, her sacrifice, settled onto Amelia's shoulders, and she finally understood the depth of the love that had always surrounded her, a love forged in terror and loss. Julian remained an island in the storm, a witness to a grief he was a part of but could not share. The neat, orderly columns of his world, assets and liabilities, profits and losses, had been razed to the ground. In their place was only this messy, agonizing human ruin. Guilt was a physical substance, a coating of ash in his mouth, a leaden weight behind his sternum. He had resented the mother who had run to save his sister. He had tormented the sister his mother had saved. He had become the chilling echo of the man they had both fled. His mind, his very instinct, reverted to its default setting. Control, fix, solve. "I will handle everything," he announced, his voice a pale imitation of his usual command. "You will have the best doctors in the world, Eleanor. A new home, security. You will never have to worry again. Amelia, your student loans, your future, it's all taken care of." Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes, red from weeping, now blazing with a fire he knew all too well. "Is that what this is to you? A hostile takeover? An asset to be acquired? You think you can write a check and purchase a family? You terrorized me for 2 months, Julian. You made me feel worthless, invisible. You hated me." "No," he said, the word raw with self-loathing. "I didn't hate you. I hated him. I hated the part of me that is him. My father forged me into a weapon, Amelia. He taught me that empathy was a fatal flaw, that sentiment was a disease. Every time I looked at you, I saw something I wasn't supposed to feel, a connection, and it terrified the part of him that lives in me. So I tried to destroy it. I tried to destroy you because I was too cowardly to destroy him in myself. The word sorry is an insult to what I've done, but it's the only word I have. I am so, so sorry." The path forward was not a road, but a minefield. The first step was practical, an area where Julian could operate with brutal efficiency. Within hours, Eleanor was settled in a private suite at the country's leading cardiac hospital, under a carefully constructed false identity. The room was quiet, sterile, and safe. For Amelia, it was a dizzying transition from worrying about co-pays to seeing a team of world-renowned specialists consult at her mother's bedside. She watched Julian on the phone, his voice cold and precise, orchestrating logistics with the same intensity he would a multi-billion-dollar merger. He was wielding his power not as a cudgel of arrogance, but as a shield. He moved them into a sprawling penthouse apartment with bulletproof windows and a view of the city that seemed to stretch into eternity. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and secure, but it felt suffocatingly empty. Amelia found herself wandering its silent, cavernous rooms, her footsteps echoing on marble floors. She missed the creak of the floorboards in their old apartment, the comforting clutter of books, the scent of her mother's chamomile tea. Julian tried to fill the silence with things. He had a personal stylist deliver a wardrobe of designer clothes. Amelia left them in their boxes. He had a black Amex card issued in her name. She used it once to buy a specific brand of biscuits Eleanor liked. He was fluent in the language of acquisition, but hopelessly illiterate in the language of family. Their conversations in the hushed hospital waiting rooms were stilted, painful things. They were two strangers bound by blood, trying to assemble a puzzle of a shared life with half the pieces missing. "I hired a team to find the best art history post-grad programs," he told her one afternoon, staring at the muted television screen. "Oxford, the Sorbonne. Wherever you want to go, I'll arrange it." Amelia looked at him, at the man who could move mountains with a phone call, but couldn't meet her eyes. "I don't want a university, Julian," she said softly. "I want to know what you were like before. Did you have a favorite stuffed animal? Did you like climbing trees? I want to know about the little boy our mother had to leave behind." The question seemed to short-circuit him. He had no file for this, no data points. His memories of childhood were a curated collection of lessons in ruthlessness, of his father's cold approval being the only prize worth winning. "I had a dog once," he finally offered, the memory surfacing like a relic from a shipwreck. "A golden retriever. My father gave him away. He said attachments were for the weak." In that small, bleak statement, Amelia saw the boy, the lonely, unloved child who had been systematically stripped of his humanity, and for the first time a sliver of empathy pierced through her anger. The shadow of Marcus Thorne Sr. loomed over them all. Julian knew his father's silence was not acquiescence, it was observation. A predator watches its prey before it strikes. The summons came not as a letter, but as a black car that appeared outside the hospital, the driver holding a single folded note with Julian's name on it. "He knows," Julian said, his face grim as he showed Amelia the note. "He wants a meeting, at the estate, Alone. No, Amelia said, her voice unyielding. She stood, her posture radiating a strength she didn't know she possessed. He does not get to erase me a second time. We are the truth, Julian. He is the lie. We face him together. The Thorne estate was not a home, it was a mausoleum, a Gothic testament to wealth and misery, set amidst acres of manicured, lifeless grounds. As they were led by a silent butler into the library, Amelia felt the oppressive cold of the place seep into her bones. It was a room built to intimidate, all dark wood, towering shelves of leather-bound books that looked as if they had never been opened, and a single monstrous desk. Behind it sat Marcus Thorne Sr. He was an older, sharper version of Julian, his face a roadmap of cruelty. But where Julian's eyes, even at their coldest, had held a flicker of some buried emotion, his father's were flat, reptilian, utterly devoid of light. He looked past Amelia as if she were a piece of furniture, his entire focus a weapon aimed at his son. "So," Marcus began, his voice a dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "The ghosts have returned. I will concede your mother is more resilient than I anticipated. I had assumed the indignities of poverty would have finished the job years ago. But you, Julian, you are the true disappointment, wallowing in sentiment. There's no profit in it." "They are my mother and my sister," Julian said. His voice was level, calm. Standing next to Amelia, he felt an anchor he had never known. The lifelong, primal fear of his father was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. Marcus finally turned his chilling gaze on Amelia, his eyes cataloging her simple dress, her worn shoes. It was the same dismissive assessment Julian had once given her, but stripped of all theater, leaving only pure, unadulterated contempt. "And this is the consequence of her betrayal. A waitress, I'm told, utterly common. Tell me, girl, what is your price? Name a number. I am prepared to be exceedingly generous to have this unfortunate chapter closed permanently." Before Julian could unleash the torrent of rage building in his chest, Amelia stepped forward. She was not the nervous waitress from Etoile. She was the daughter of Eleanor Vance and the sister of Julian Thorne, and she was done being invisible. "We don't want your money," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tomb-like silence of the library. "We are not a chapter to be closed. We are the story you tried to burn, and we survived. You have no power here. Your threats are the ramblings of a lonely old man. Look around you. You live in a prison of your own making, and the only person you have successfully erased from this world is yourself." For the first time, a flicker of something raw broke through Marcus's icy facade. It was the shock of a despot whose authority has been utterly and completely denied. He opened his mouth, the venom gathering for a final, killing strike, but Julian held up a hand. "Save your breath, father," Julian said, the formal title now an epithet. "We are leaving. You will not attempt to contact us. You will not come near Eleanor. If you so much as breathe in our direction, every document, every testimony, every dirty secret of the past 25 years will become the lead story on every news network in the world. Your legacy won't be in the financial journals. It will be in the true crime podcasts. The choice for once is yours." They turned their backs on him. They walked out of the library through the grand, cold foyer and into the sunlight, leaving Marcus Thorne Sr. utterly alone, a king reigning over an empire of shadows and dust. Healing was not an event. It was a process, a slow, painstaking excavation of buried pain. There were days of brittle silence, where the sheer alienness of their situation was a palpable presence in the room. There were nights Eleanor woke up screaming from nightmares of Marcus. There were moments when Julian's ingrained instinct to command and control would surface, and Amelia would push back, her voice sharp, reminding him, "You are not my boss. You are my brother. Learn the difference." He tried. He learned to listen more than he spoke. He started spending afternoons at the hospital, not on his phone, but reading 18th century poetry aloud to Eleanor, his voice awkward at first, then softening as he found the rhythm. He was giving her back the beauty his father had stolen from her. For Amelia, he did not just offer a blank check. One day he went alone to Mr. Allister's antique shop. He spent an hour in the quiet, dusty space, running his fingers over the polished wood of a Georgian side table, trying to see the world through her eyes. He spoke to the old man, and for the first time he asked for help. Weeks later, the City Museum announced the establishment of the Eleanor Vance Fellowship for Historical Preservation, a prestigious, fully funded position dedicated to the study of decorative arts. The fellowship was endowed by an anonymous benefactor. Mr. Allister, with a knowing twinkle in his eye, nominated Amelia as its first recipient. Julian was not giving her a handout. He was giving her back her life's passion, the future she had put on hold. Their story did not end in a penthouse overlooking the city. It found its new beginning months later, in the dusty, sunlit confines of the shop that had once been Amelia's sanctuary. Eleanor, her heart stronger, her eyes brighter, was debating the merits of Rococo versus neoclassical design with Mr. Allister. Julian, dressed in a simple cashmere sweater that seemed infinitely more comfortable on him than his old suits of armor, was carefully examining a silver snuff box. Amelia came to stand beside him, peering over his shoulder. "The chasing is a bit clumsy for Paul de la Marie, don't you think?" she murmured, a playful challenge in her voice. "And the maker's mark is suspect, likely a Victorian imitation." Julian looked from the box to her face, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his lips. A smile that reached his pale gray eyes and filled them with a light she had never seen before. "You're right," he said. "My mistake." The words were simple, unremarkable, but within them lay the quiet, profound architecture of their new world. It was not the grand dramatic resolution of a fairy tale. It was the small, easy intimacy of a brother and a sister, sharing a language that was finally their own. The scars remained, etched into the very fabric of who they were, a permanent record of the cost of survival. But standing there, amidst the patient, beautiful history of forgotten things, they were no longer just survivors. They were a family piecing themselves together, one small, authentic, and priceless moment at a time. They were home.